I keep trying to do the Marvel Star Wars opening with like the MCU-esque intro, except all I keep getting are all these paper cuts. I guess that's just another example of the wonders of cinema. At least they're Mickey. So San Diego Comic-Con 2018 was essentially characterized in the reveal of the Clone Wars Season 7 dropping in 2019. Can't wait for that. But there were also some other really good reveals that Lucasfilm and Marvel, of course, had to share. One of which was the addition of a compilation series that would tell one-shot stories during each individual era of Star Wars. Of course, that is the Republic era, the Rebellion era, and then last but not least, the Resistance era. If there's one thing you should take away about Star Wars, it's that they really like words that begin with R-E. I mean, the next one's probably going to be the Recycle era. We hope. In this series, there is a total of 30 comics, 10 per era, and 5 per moral alignment. So there are 5 for the Republic villains, 5 for the Republic heroes, and so on with the other eras. I'm doing a lot more math than I thought I would this morning. I guess public school didn't entirely fail me. What's really cool, of course, besides getting more explanation and characters that we don't normally receive, is that this is a unification of Star Wars in a way. In little example that we see of this across the Star Wars universe, we don't typically, I mean, yes, everything is a connected universe, and you can see that in books like From a Certain Point of View, or even the Ahsoka novel, or so on. There's always a little bit of connectivity, especially in like that extended universe, the current extended universe that we have. But what's cool about this is that it is a unification of sorts. It's all one-shots, and it does contain stuff from each individual section, and I'm sure there will be callbacks across the board too. I'm not really a big single-issue comic book kind of gal. I have plenty of volumized Star Wars comics and other types of comics, so I'm actually going to be reviewing this by the volume. So there's 5 comic books in here, and that's how I'm going to be doing each of them. My initial plan was to actually do the heroes and villains comic book series in one video, but I kind of decided towards the last minute that was going to be a lot, and it was going to be a lengthy video. But just a forewarning, there will be spoilers ahead, and spoilers for pretty much everything is fair game, and we're going to talk about it. First up, we have Maul, or I guess I should say Darth Maul, since the comic takes place before the events of the Clone Wars, where he renounces the Sith religion and takes up his own dastardly path down the dark side of the Force. Here we find Darth Maul, the bloodthirsty OG Sith apprentice to Darth Sidious, on an undercover bounty hunter mission alongside Zek Pyro, a renowned swindler and thief on Coruscant. It's clearly all a setup, though, because the masked Maul is operating for a cartel of his own creation, the Cadus Cartel, as he later mentions is the name of the Padawan he slayed to prove his skill against the Jedi Order, the only kill he was allotted from Sidious, seen in the 2017 Darth Maul series. This one-shot acts as continuation of that arc, in that we still have a bloodthirsty, unsatisfied Maul who is doing just about anything to get his fix, even stooping as low as killing Force sensitives that exist in the underbelly of society, so not to out the Sith. Zek Pyro, as Maul points out in his own inner monologue, isn't even sure he's Force sensitive, and possibly could have made a strong ally if trained. But the Sith apprentice isn't here to build allies or make friends, and the rule of 2 would forbid it anyway. So Pyro gets kebabbed by some shrapnel that Maul force flings at him. No lightsaber marks, no trace to Sith's rising. It's worth pointing out that when Maul mentions Palpatine's curating relationships and connections on the political sphere, he says he's building his own down below, which sets up his later arc perfectly as an underground crime lord of Crimson Dawn. When Sidious finds out, because of course he does, he's less sympathetic as he was in Darth Maul number 5 when they originally discussed his bloodlust. In fact, the art and scene looks almost identical to each other, with the exception of the mixed reaction. Intent on teaching his pupil to pick up collecting baseball cards or another hobby that won't potentially jeopardize his maniacal plans, Sidious takes Maul on a field trip to the Sith Temple on Malachor. Yes, the very temple we find him creeping around on Star Wars Rebels.
They review the fallen brethren of Once Upon a Sith, and Sidious tells Maul to take it all in and to breathe deep, which Maul translates as, huff the ashes of actual people, which is apparently a new drug we've just missed here because Maul has a crazy vision of himself in Jedi robes. He's appalled by this because tan isn't the new black, and he does not approve of the fashion choices. On top of that, a young fellow Zabrak is begging for help to save his family. Maul has no interest in preserving this boy's family, but his bloodlust controls him and he ends up destroying the beast anyway with his double-bladed lightsaber.
I will never forgive the sequel trilogy for not giving Rey a double-bladed blue lightsaber. As seen in this comic, it looks so cool. She's used to fighting with a staff, so why not give her something that she's used to fighting with style-wise? I'll never be over it.
The family thanks and applauds Maul for his bravery and courage, and more so of the Jedi as an overall organization, claiming that they are always reliable, which he resents and ultimately ends up killing them for, stating that the Jedi are merely a lie told to an entire galaxy. Therein lies the lesson, of course. Rage fuels the fire, but it's not enough, and if they aren't careful, using that rage as only a tool could only help the Jedi's reputation grow.
Overall, I think this comic did a pretty good job of continuing the story that the Darth Maul comic series had going for it. I thought that his bloodlust was a good thing to tack on because he's very reserved in comparison in the Phantom Menace. Then again, we don't really hear a lot of him other than one line.
Tatooine is sparsely populated. If the trace was correct, I will find them quickly, Master. At last we will reveal ourselves to the Jedi. At last we will have revenge. Yes, my Master.
But Maul's always been a character that I've been interested in. And while this story doesn't cover a huge plot, and I shouldn't expect it to because it's a single issue, there's plenty of Darth Maul venomous evilness to cover up any redundancy that kind of feels like it's there in the beginning of the shot. Definitely worth a read.
Moving on, we get the Jango Fett storyline, which is called Training, and is divided between past and present. The past being how he came to be the model for the cloning process, and the present acting as Bounty Hunter 101, featuring his son Boba Fett. You've heard of him, right? The issue starts out in the present on a planet known as Telerath, which in current canon this is the first time it's mentioned, but in Legends was utilized frequently in the Knights of the Old Republic comics. It's also an advertised destination in Star Tours The Adventure Continues in Disney World and Land, even if you can't actually travel there. Bounty hunters Nilda, Rin, and Tiver.
I will not be judged for pronouncing stuff wrong when there hasn't been any verbal pronunciation of it.
As I was saying, the bounty hunters gossip about how the job seems beneath requiring a team, let alone a team that includes the infamous Jango Fett. The team mistakes young Boba as a cretin following Jango on a humorous turn, and he sets them straight without asking for permission. They fly to Ord Mantell, which is the planet where Han Solo cites a bounty hunter attack in Empire Strikes Back that convinced him to go pay his debt to Jabba. Here on Ord Mantell, Jango and company are trying to keep a young woman from eloping with a mysterious man who has connections with the Black Sun crime syndicate, who happen to be based on Ord Mantell. It's not meant to be the focus of the story, though. Meanwhile, we leap back into the past to see Count Dooku talking to Jango about becoming the genetic template for the cloning process. He offers pretty much infinite money and pride for being the poster boy of it all. What's most interesting about his interaction is that Jango refers to the shrouded Dooku as his Sith name, Tyrannus, and Dooku refers to the Republic's clone army as a potential sight to be marveled. Considering they hang out in Attack of the Clones, it begs the question of whether Jango Fett knew Count Dooku and Tyrannus were the same person, or if he ever figured out if a Sith would not, in fact, be performing a move in the Republic's favor. I doubt he cared per se, because he's not exactly the picture of moral superiority, but hey, I'd be curious. Anyway, Jango asks for something in exchange, which obviously ends up being Boba, and we're back in the present to kidnapping this girl and keeping her from running off with a crime syndicate. Jango proves to be the superior bounty hunter and calls her bluff by preventing her escape, and the others react negatively by trying to hold Boba hostage in exchange for Jango's cut of the profit. Apparently, Boba is top of the class, though, because he literally snaps Nilda's neck and shoots Rin by means of escape, since those two were clearly working together. He spares Tiver's life since he seemed innocent and true of nature, and also because he wants him to spread their names throughout the entire galaxy. Jango is super proud of Boba, as opposed to the clones, who he clearly resents even if it isn't wholeheartedly addressed. It's cool though, because he and Boba have a sweet bonding moment over the two people that Boba just killed.
I don't know. This issue didn't really do it for me. I'm sorry. But there are so many ways to go with Jango Fett's character, and it's a very shallow way of telling the story. He just goes to Dooku, he accepts the money, and he's like, that's it. But it's like, why was he chosen? He's a bounty hunter. Like, why were they thinking, I mean, he's attractive enough, but there are prettier people in the galaxy to want to be a clone. And like, he's tough, but they have the ability to genetically mutate. They could have made anybody tough. So I know in Legends, there's a lot more as far as explaining Jango Fett and Boba Fett, and there's a lot more of a fixated focus on them. But I felt like even though this is a one-shot comic, it was weak to kind of just be like, here's the past. We're just showing this loosely, yeah, we know he got picked and we know he wanted Boba Fett. I just don't feel like we learned anything new about him here. And it was cool seeing him and Boba in action. It just felt like a waste for any kind of expansion on his character.
Next up, in Count Dooku, The Cost, is another underdeveloped villain, which, as you can guess, is Count Dooku. I feel like that's my mantra with the Republic Age villains, save for Maul. Count Dooku is on Celeste to form an alliance with an underground cartel known as the Caldana Syndicate, while also trying to maintain face with the Celestians. While there, he runs into a furry... Jedi, named Jackson, not spelled as you'd think it would be, of course, because this is Star Wars, who immediately recognizes Dooku, much to Dooku's chagrin, and reminisces of the good old days when Dooku and Yoda would spar together. A nice friendly reminder that Dooku was a part of the Order for most of his life. Not to mention that most Jedi before Attack of the Clones didn't know he was up to wrongdoing. In fact, here, Jackson mentions that the top rumor among the Jedi was that Dooku was merely gathering his own formation of Force users. They don't use the term Grey Jedi, but it's between the lines. Dooku is surprisingly hesitant to kill this young Jedi, asking Sidious if he could sway the Jedi to the dark side and enlist him. His master shuts down that ruthlessly. I mean, he already has 2 apprentices. Sidious doesn't exactly want an army here. The rule of 2 has already been shattered by Grievous and Ventress. Even though he's torn, he's not torn enough to not kill the Jedi, but more conflicted than Bloodlust McGee or Evil Grandpa here. This sympathy becomes even more evident when Jackson mentions Qui-Gon, who was Dooku's former apprentice. Dooku's conviction to help Jackson with whatever his business on Celeste is pretty convincing, even to the reader, and they enlist to find the very crime syndicate that Dooku was originally seeking out for Sidious. They find them together and fight alongside each other, Jackson of course caught off guard by Dooku's red lightsaber, a color for the notorious Sith. He doesn't get to ponder this for too long, of course, because the moment he's led to the crime bosses, Dooku has him swiftly killed off as well. Afterwards, he makes arrangement of an alliance with the underbelly of Celeste.
I enjoyed this issue more than the Jango one. Not more than the Maul one, but this was better because at least it shows Dooku acknowledging his past and his present in a more linear fashion. It didn't have any back and forth flashbacks except for that quick one where they show him and Yoda dueling, which was very cool. Because it's nice to remember that Dooku was actually a Jedi for a long time, and people didn't know that he was up to wrongdoing at this point, which is crazy. I think I still would have preferred something farther in the past. I would have preferred to see Dooku in the Jedi Order and how he was back then, because the prequel trilogy is just so convoluted with background context that they act like you should already kind of know, even though you don't. The cool thing about the Clone Wars is it does offer a little bit more on Dooku and Grievous and other villains that are underdeveloped and played, but we still don't have much from like the past.
Moving on, we have General Grievous in Burn. Despite being trained by Count Dooku, I mean, the guy mentions it every other second in the movie.
Just as Count Dooku predicted. But the loss of Count Dooku is being trained in your Jedi arts by Count Dooku.
General Grievous is not as poised or as civilized as Dooku. He is out for blood and to prove himself. He's frankly probably one of the biggest narcissists in all of Star Wars, with all of his statues of himself and his determination to make himself perfect. He's kind of like the anti-Nebula in the MCU. because Grievous actually makes himself robotic, whereas Nebula does not give her consent to become robotic. Anyway, Grievous is on the hunt for a Padawan and their master on Ladev, slaying them down with considerable ease. There isn't a whole lot of dialogue, but there sure is enough action to make up for it. The scene ends in their demise, but the true intentions of the Jedi are revealed, and Grievous ends up crawling over to an old Jedi temple. He pretty much wrecks the place as he goes until reaching a power source at the core of the temple, which is likely a holocron. Despite being a Jedi hunter and trained in the art of saber fighting, he ain't no force wielder, and never will be, as proved when he sticks his metallic hand in the light and pulls it out unfeeling. Keeps going for it, not taking the hint at all, and instead continues to mock the pathetic Jedi Order while continuing his pursuit of their knowledge. Somehow he enters this otherworldly realm, and we see Grievous's true self before he became all robotic, and there are chants about how he is the pathetic one, and how he will never know the power of the Jedi because he instead chooses to be wrapped up in himself and alter himself. He is even told what no man wants to hear. He's small. In comparison to the power of the Force, he's nothing. And this preys on Grievous's deepest inner insecurities as he decides to destroy the temple altogether. Despite this, the light remains.
I really liked this one. Truly. This brought Grievous back to what he was in 2002 in the 2D Clone Wars series when he was introduced pre-Revenge of the Sith. He was a Jedi hunter, and he was something that you would see in horror movies, the way he would chase those Jedi through the forest and he hunted them down. This was very reminiscent of that. And there's not a ton of exposition here, but we do get to see Grievous in his full natural form. And it does address the topic that he, even though he's a narcissist and he's like, I'm the best because I made myself the best, he's not. And it's thoroughly addressed, I think, in such a powerful, impactful way. I love when Star Wars takes people to random other realms. Don't know why. It's one of my favorite things.
And last, with the special, some good food. Okay, I'm kind of joking, because I really did enjoy this collection for the most part, but I would have been very disappointed if Ventress wasn't highlighted, or at least mentioned. If you're going to do Grievous, you have to do Dooku's other problem child. Them's the rules. In this comic, she's post-Sith Ventress, of course, and is a full-fledged bounty hunter, still not really pulling any punches and having a low regard for human life. It's more than the zero regard she used to have, so baby steps here. Most importantly, we see our girl Ahsoka Tano in comic book form for the first real time in canon. I'm not counting Forces of Destiny or anything like that. And she's really just shown for a single page as a high bounty, plus a great flashback picture, because that's right, this comic takes place during that time when Ahsoka was high-key framed for murder and on the run. Ventress takes the job, which I would have loved to see fully realized here. Instead, we're taken on a different journey. Ventress is sidetracked when she hears a cry for help. Some big creepy lug is preying on two young girls, trying to get them for their food. She considers turning the other way, addressing that it really wasn't her problem to deal with. But Ventress isn't like the other bad guys in that she's not lost to the dark side. She's just angry and in pain, trying to get even for her own misfortune and hardships as an abused young girl. And she doesn't know where to put that rage most of the time. Here she puts it to good use, remembering what it was like to be young and afraid, and takes down the creeps in the alleyway, saving those young girls and telling them to keep their food, even giving them a weapon to protect themselves with in the future. She's not fully reformed here, but we see her on her way to redemption even if she doesn't know it.
Well, Ventress and Grievous are probably compared to because they're both Dooku's Padawans. I'd say she's a lot more comparable to Maul as far as their character arcs go and the way that they deviate from each other. They definitely take their paths in different directions. For a while, they take it in the very same direction. They harvest off the dark side of the Force, but eventually Maul just kind of keeps seething and he finds his own path of darkness. Whereas Ventress, she was never really lost. She was twisted around and manipulated, and her vulnerability and insecurities. I'm not trying to diminish what she's done because she's done a lot of terrible things, but it's worth noting that she was never really evil. She was just full of grief and was abused. And all of that was exploited to make her do some evil things. And it's why her path for redemption is so clear to be seen. And it's so cool that they show it in this comic book. And the fact that this is happening in the middle of something that's happening in the Clone Wars series is really neat too, because we know that Ahsoka's on the run and we know that they eventually meet up. Well, next time you see me, we'll be talking about the heroic side of the Republic. You guys have a wonderful day, and may the Force be with you.